The Ramchal explains that everything in existence that exists is because God wills its existence. However, the human being is the only creation which, besides willing the being's existence, there's a degree of independence which the human being has, which no other living species has, no other creation has, and that's called free choice. Every aspect of human being's life is predestined, except one's relation with God, his spiritual dimension, that's determined by the person's own initiative. If you choose the right initiative, you advance yourself. If you choose the wrong initiative, you regress and you actually could go into a state of self-destruction. But in every other aspect of that person's life, it's predetermined what the destiny of that person is. Okay? But the ultimate human being is the Jew. He explains something which Rav Chaim Volozhin writes in the Nefesh HaChaim, that the soul of a Jew is a dimension that even the greatest angel cannot fathom, because the soul of the Jew emanates from under the heavenly throne of God. Everything else that was created below that level. So to be able to fathom anything outside your parameters, it's beyond your reach. But the Jewish soul, which is the essence of a human being, which is the soul, that was created from under the heavenly throne. So the most intimate location with God is that location. Therefore, the Jew has a potential to cleave to that source, from which the soul was created. The other souls that were created from lower down, they have no relevance to that. And therefore, even angels, when the Jews engage with God, the angels stand outside. They can't enter into the parameters, into the inner sanctums. The Jew enters into the inner sanctums of God. Before the soul enters into the body, what we call the neshama is no different than any other creation. The soul has no choice. The soul is what it is, the way God created it. It has its potential. Its potential hasn't been actualized. Of course, the actualization of the soul is based on human initiative. You're challenged. We have an evil inclination. Until a child is born into existence, the evil inclination has no relevance to that child's life whatsoever. As a result of that, the child has no free choice at any level. It's purely a recipient of God's influence to be what it is. Once it's born into existence, now it's subject to what the world's all about. The world itself is the evil inclination's domain, so to say. He's permitted to approach every human being. Every human being who has a soul. He has no relevance to the non-intelligent creature, only to the human being. Logically speaking, you would say, if a person is not obligated, and despite his not obligation, he goes and takes the initiative and behave as if he would be obligated, you would say the level of that service has greater value than a person must serve because he's obligated to serve. I'll give you an example. A non-Jew has no obligation to wear tefillin whatsoever. He has no obligation to give charity. Despite the fact he has no obligation if he does it. That you would say that's an altruistic act. He has no obligation. He does it in either case. The Jew, where God says you must, And to a degree, Jew has no choice. The reason why you're doing it is because that's what your responsibility is all about. And if you don't, there are consequences. Whose action seemingly logically would seem to be a greater level of accomplishment? Logically, I would say, and we all would say, the one who's not obligated, despite the non-obligation performs, his action is more altruistic and therefore has greater value. The one that has no choice, you must. Of course, you have choice not to listen, but when you do listen, why are you listening? Because you must. So therefore, that action should have less value. Yet the Talmud concludes that Godol HaMitzvah Osa, greater is the one who's obligated to perform and does perform, the one who's not obligated to perform and does perform. What's the rationale? What's the rationale? A person is conscripted into the armed services. You must follow orders. Why? Because you're a soldier in the armed forces. Person is not in the armed forces, despite he has no obligation to follow orders, but he does follow orders as if he would be in the service. You'd say that person is a true dedicated patriot of the country. Although the consequences of a soldier not following orders would be considered insubordination, so that's why he performs. The ordinary citizen would not be considered insubordination. He behaves no less than the soldier who's conscripted. But yet, when it comes to serving God, the one who's obligated, his value is greater than the one who's not obligated and performs. What's the rationale? So one of the commentators, the commentator on the page, which is known as Tosfos, explains that one who's obligated, that person has a force which does not want him to do that. It's called the evil inclination. So a person is obligated, there's an evil inclination which doesn't want you to do that. So the challenge of a person who's obligated is a greater challenge than a person who's not obligated. So the one who's not obligated, the reason why he can do it more easily, because he has no challenge. You choose to do it, you do it. There's no pushback, so to say. But an adult, when you become a person of obligation, you got plenty of pushback. Because since the result of that action has special value, therefore there's a challenge known as evil inclination, which does whatever it can to prevent you from doing that act that you're obligated to do. Therefore, the accomplishment of that act has greater value. Therefore, one who's obligated, the result of his action has greater innate value than the one who's not obligated. I mean, I would say it goes into the concept, as it says in Pirkei Avos, that Lefum Tzara Agro, that the more difficult a challenge is, the greater is the value of the action. The one who's obligated, his challenge is much greater. Because the evil inclination tries to distract him, to hoodwink him, not to allow. Despite that, despite all the temptation and difficulties, you do it in either case. The person who's not obligated, if he does it, he doesn't have those degrees of challenge. We're not saying he doesn't have any value, but has much less of value than the one who's obligated to perform and does perform. That's the simple understanding, the way Tosfos on the page of Talmud, that's the way he explains it. Ramchal explains it totally different. But it has to do with, on the superficial level, it's the way Tosfos says. But after Ramchal, you'll understand it differently, but it's not contradictory to what Tosfos explains, where the challenge is greater. We say, there are no two souls which are identical. Everybody has his unique spiritual profile, and based on that spiritual profile, the objective is to perfect your soul. And that's why the challenges of one are not necessarily the challenges of the other. And what comes easily to one comes with greater difficulty to another. Because based on the objective of perfection, every person's life is tailor-made in terms of what he has to accomplish. And that's why it says in Chazal, don't pass judgment on your friend and you fell until you arrive in his place. What his challenge is may not be your challenge. and what your challenge is not his challenge. Because each person's script is written specifically for him to address whatever his needs are, his spiritual needs are. And that's what life is all about. But again, the more we advance, spiritually speaking, we're in need of other challenges. If we regress, we need other challenges, because the objective is to get us to the goalpost. So when we say in the morning service, in the blessings of Shema, God renews creation every day. Of course, it means he wills creation continuously. Because if you should cease willing it for a moment, it doesn't exist. But it's even more than that. Every day, based on man's performance, the challenges have to continuously change. Because what's the objective? The objective is perfection. So if you advanced the previous day, there's no objective today. You have to meet the next challenge. The one who failed, he has to be presented with a new challenge. So there's always a tweaking of the system, and there's always a new infusion of influence to be able to ultimately achieve what is meant to be achieved. So this is the meaning. God renews creation every day. There's always a new infusion within creation every day, in its totality and its specificity in regard to each person. But even more. And it's a new understanding. The Talmud says, based on a verse in Tehillim, Psalms, that if God doesn't give the person the ability to stand up to evil inclination, it is impossible to survive. You need special divine intervention to be able to meet the challenges of the evil inclination. He could outwit us, he could run rings around us, and he could convince us based on the nature of human being that night is day and day is night. The leaven of delusion is not to be believed. So why can't he? Because God doesn't allow him to. But in terms of his ability, he can. So whatever we do is what we call siyata d'shmaya. And it's based on a verse in Tehillim, Psalms. But the degree of that spiritual intervention is based on who you are. Are you worthy to have that intervention? Do you merit it? Don't you merit it? And if you do merit, to what degree do you merit? It's all dependent. So now, a person puts on tefillin. An adult. As an adult, a male has to put on tefillin. As a minor, you don't have to put on tefillin. Now, why do we put on tefillin? Because the Torah says you must put on tefillin. But what is the result of putting on tefillin? It creates an energy, which is a spiritual energy, which brings about perfection in one's soul and in the world at large. It perfects the totality of existence. It contributes to that perfection. And every Jew puts on tefillin, in his own way, contributes to that. But of course, the level of contribution is based on the qualitative infusion of that person. Intent, does he do it out of reverence, out of love? Is he focused? He's not distracted? The many variables will determine the quality of that action. But we have multiple mitzvos. The result of doing those actions generate a force, and that force addresses perfection. Now, why does it? You know why? To who does God give that energy? I'll give you an example. You have two pills. You have two capsules. One capsule has the real medication. The other medication is a placebo, but it's in the same capsule. The capsule that has the real antibiotic, the real medication, it will affect you because of what's contained within that capsule. The other capsule, although it looks the same, it has powder in it, it doesn't have in that powder what capsule A has. Therefore, it doesn't affect you the same way. An adult who's becomes a person of obligation, because you're obligated, your action generates a certain energy. But why? Because God infuses you with an ability that your action activates those forces. A miner who doesn't have an obligation, his action doesn't have within it the ability to activate those forces. Two people do the exact same action. The child, the minor, and the adult. One is called a dud. The other one's called a mega missile. It looks the same, but they're not the same. One has the booster rocket. One has the ability to launch out of the atmosphere. The other one can't get it off the ground. It has a semblance, but it doesn't activate forces. That's why one who's obligated, because your responsibility is to accomplish. Therefore, God gives you the means to bring about that accomplishment. I'll give you an example. There's a game called Monopoly. Larry played it when it's been on the market a long time. Larry still walks the boardwalk even today. Okay. So Monopoly, it's called play money. What kind of money do you give to a child? It may resemble currency, but it's not the real thing. The adult is given real money, real currency. Real currency has buying power. Currency that looks like currency, if it's not the real thing, it doesn't have any buying power. The adult who does the mitzvah, that mitzvah has effective power. That's infused with an energy because God gives that person, the soul, that energy that when he does this, it activates the force. The child, being of non-obligation, it doesn't activate anything. Or it's at a very minimal level. Therefore, the adult who's obligated, his accomplishment is much greater than the one who's not obligated, because he was never given the means. The result is not the same. But now let's talk about what Tosa says. If you are able to bring about a level of perfection, which is not possible without God's intervention, and giving you that ability, what is the purpose of the evil inclination? To challenge you, not to allow that to come about. So the one who has the evil inclination, his obligation, his result is greater, is the effect of his actions greater. Proof of the pudding, he has an evil inclination. It's not because it's more difficult. The evil inclination indicates the value of that action. The other action, which has no value or barely value, evil inclination doesn't bother with it. But the adult, where it's a mega result, he contends with that. He doesn't want that to happen. Therefore, the adult has an evil inclination, and the minor doesn't have that same evil inclination, because the action itself really doesn't bring about that end result. This is the Ramchal, how he explains why Godla Matsuva also greater is the one who's obligated. It has nothing to do with altruistic. It has to do with the reality of who you are and what is your weaponry. You have a different type of weaponry. The adult is given weaponry which has great power. The minor, it may look like the weaponry, but it's not infused with that power. Therefore, his accomplishment is minimal compared to the accomplishment of an adult when he engages in the spiritual weaponry. There's a concept known as the tzaddik decrees, and God follows the decree of the tzaddik. Who's God's true partner? God's true partner in creation is the tzaddik, is the devoutly righteous person. Why? Because without the Jew, the world has no value. The objective Jew is to perfect existence through his choices, his positive choices. So the world is heading in the direction of perfection due to whose investment? The investment of the tzaddik. So in essence, God gives the means from above, Now the tzaddik has to make a choice. And of course, because he's devoutly righteous, his choice is to utilize it as it was meant to be utilized. And therefore that perfection comes about. And the greater the tzaddik, the more advanced the world becomes. We're getting close to perfection. So in essence, who's God's partner in creation? The tzaddik. And every Jew to a degree, if you actually live your life conforming to the Torah, it must be at a much lesser level, but to some degree, you have a worthiness because you're a contributor. You know, in the insurance industry, it's called a round table. You have the $25 million round table, the $10 million round table, $5 million round table, the $1 million round table. It depends which round table you belong to, where you go, which convention you go to. Where are you invited? You sit on the $25 million round table, that you generate that level of premium, you're a megastar. And therefore, what's available to you is not available to everyone else. Because he's really making the company advance financially. The other ones too, we give them incentives. Therefore, we give various perks, whatever the perks may be. But the larger amounts, you got greater perks. Because your contribution is great. You're a contributor to the sum total of the company. The greater the tzaddik, you're a true contributor. You're God's partner. Because God provides the means. Now the question is, what do you do with the means? That's the Jew, that's the human being. So in essence, the tzaddik is God's shutaf, is God's partner in creation. Now, based on a verse, Chazal tell us, tzaddik gozev HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekayim. Let's say, according to the natural level of existence, things take a certain direction. And the tzaddik decrees it shouldn't be that way. Person has an illness, and it's a special tzaddik, he says, you should have a recovery. And he prays for that person. Although statistically, that average doesn't have a recovery, but because the tzaddik decrees this person should live, God will listen to it, and God will bring a healing to that person. Even though naturally, statistically, it's not that way. But the tzaddik has a special power of intervention that he could intervene and change the direction of that person's life. That's called the tzaddik decrees, and God follows the decree of the tzaddik. But God's the master. Doesn't make a difference. But who's the tzaddik? The tzaddik is God's partner. Without the tzaddik, the world's going nowhere. That's why God created the world. As a result of that, the tzaddik's request is given a priority at that special level. That if it could be accommodated, God will accommodate that. Why? Because the tzaddik is God's partner. Okay? Now, based on the Zohar, before the soul is born into existence, the soul is no different than any other creation. It exists because God wills its existence. Only once it's infused in the body is it subject to choice. That's where the context of choice begins. Now, the soul becomes a contributor. Before, you're only on the receiving end. You're not in a position to be on the giving end. Once you're born into existence, now we talk about you're on the giving end. Because now you're in a position to make choices. And now you can be a contributor. And if you are a contributor, you have a right to make demands of God. Of course, they have to be appropriate demands. Person to recover from an illness. A person has a financial reversal, give him a blessing, things should get better financially. There should be safety. The Jews should live in peace. They shouldn't be threatened. A tzaddik could bring all that about. So the Zohar says, before a person's born, God's sustenance to the soul is called named de kesufa. It's shameful bread. It's like a person's a poor man, never earned a dime in his life. And he comes before his benefactor with his hat in his hand. He's almost like ashamed. It's a shame. Why are you deserving? You're at the mercy of the benefactor. Only the good heartedness, but there's an embarrassment. I'm not deserving. It's only because of what I receive. But once you become an earner, and now you come to pick up your salary check, and you earned every cent of that. And not only that, you even earned the bonus, and you appreciate it because you contributed. You come with pride. You come up in an upright posture and say, I want this, I want that. And you can make suggestions even, because you're a physician now. You're no longer in a shameful state. Now you are a partner, and as a partner, you have rights. I can hold my head high. It's no longer the shameful bread. When I take the bread, I'm not ashamed, because what I get, what I receive, I have a right to it. Because I myself am a participant in creation as God is. And that's meaning you're God's partner in creation for that reason. Could you imagine? You have a $10 million project, and we're trying to raise money, and a person gets $1, and you give a lot more. Another person gives $5 million to the project. And when these two people come in, they barely pay attention to the one who gave the $1. But you could have given a lot more. She says, just look what's going on over there. The man who gives $5 million, they give him all the attention. Me, they don't even acknowledge. It's not fair. I also contributed. I also gave $1. Don't underestimate the value of $1. Understand? If you understood your value versus the other value, you'd be ashamed to open your mouth. It's only because of the way you see it, only through your own lens, that even the $1 for you is too much. Therefore, you think there's a major contribution. But you're barely a participant in the project. The tzaddik, he's a mega participant. He can make demands. Why does the God answer the tzaddik's supplication? Why not my supplication? At best, you're a voice in the wilderness. The tzaddik is not a voice in the wilderness. His voice is recognized. He's a recognized personality because he has the relationship. You, who are you? You're nobody. But I also put on tefillin. I also do this. But in terms of where you should be, where you're not, you're way, way behind where you should be. Therefore, when we talk about partnership, we talk about a significant partner that you are the major contributor due to the choices that you make.